They fire it, and then it disappears. Not because it missed, not because it failed, because it's waiting, circling 50,000 feet above contested airspace for hours, analyzing targets, making decisions, and choosing when to strike, without any human input, without any communication back to controllers, completely autonomous. This isn't science fiction. It's the AGM-158 CLRASM, the long-range anti-ship missile, and it represents something fundamentally different from every cruise missile that came before it. Traditional cruise missiles fly a pre-programmed path to a pre-designated target. You fire, it flies, it hits. Simple, predictable, and increasingly ineffective against modern defenses that can track launch points and intercept weapons following fixed trajectories. LRASM doesn't work that way. You fire it toward a general area, potentially hundreds of miles away, and then it takes over. The missile doesn't need GPS updates. It doesn't need targeting data from the launching platform. It doesn't need anything, because everything it needs to find, identify, prioritize, and destroy enemy ships is built into the weapon itself. And that capability terrifies anyone planning naval operations in contested environments, because you can't jam a missile that isn't receiving commands. You can't spoof a weapon that's making its own decisions. And you can't predict what you can't track. Let me show you why this autonomous hunter is changing naval warfare, and why adversaries are realizing that controlling the sea just became exponentially harder. The concept starts with a problem the Navy faced for decades. Anti-ship missiles like the Harpoon served reliably since the 1970s. But they require something critical. They need to know exactly where the target is when they launch. In modern naval combat, that's a death sentence for the launching platform. To target enemy ships, you need to radiate with active radar or get close enough for visual identification. Both actions expose your position. And in an era where Chinese destroyers carry YJ-18 missiles with 300-mile ranges and Russian cruisers field P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship weapons, exposing your position means dying before your own missiles reach their targets. LRASM solves this by making the missile itself the sensor. The launching platform doesn't need to see the target. It only needs to know approximately where hostile forces are operating, a general search area. The aircraft or ship fires LRASM toward that area and immediately breaks contact, preserving its stealth and survivability. What happens next is where the revolution occurs. The missile flies toward the designated search area using inertial navigation and terrain correlation. It doesn't emit radar signals that would reveal its approach. It stays passive, listening, analyzing, hunting. And when it reaches the search area, it doesn't immediately attack. It loiters. The AGM-158 CLRASM has a range exceeding 200 nautical miles when launched from aircraft, potentially much greater depending on altitude and launch profile. Official figures remain classified, but flight tests suggest ranges could exceed 350 miles in optimal conditions. That's not just standoff range, that's over-the-horizon strike capability, where the target never even knows a missile is inbound until seconds before impact. But range is meaningless without the ability to find targets independently. And this is where LRASM becomes genuinely revolutionary. The missile carries a multi-mode sensor package that includes infrared imaging, a passive RF receiver, and a millimeter wave radar. That combination allows it to build a complete tactical picture without emitting detectable signals until the final moments of attack. The passive RF receiver listens for electronic emissions. Every warship radiates electromagnetic signals: radar, communications, electronic warfare systems, fire control. Those emissions create a signature as unique as a fingerprint. LRASM's onboard library contains signatures for Chinese Type 055 destroyers, Russian Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates, and every other potential adversary vessel. The missile compares detected emissions against its database, identifies ship types, and begins prioritizing targets based on pre-programmed threat hierarchies. High-value targets like aircraft carriers and cruisers rank higher than escorts and support vessels. But electronic emissions can be deceived. Ships can shut down radars, operate in MCON, emissions control, or use decoys that mimic real vessels. That's where the infrared imaging comes in. The IR sensor detects heat signatures from engines, exhaust stacks, and superstructures. Different ship classes produce different thermal profiles. A carrier's massive nuclear reactors create heat patterns distinct from a destroyer's gas turbines. The missile correlates IR data with RF intelligence, cross-referencing multiple sensor inputs to confirm target identity. And if emissions are silent and thermal signatures are ambiguous, the millimeter wave radar provides the final layer. Unlike traditional radar that broadcasts continuously, the missile activates its radar only briefly during terminal approach, giving defenders minimal warning. The radar provides high-resolution imaging that reveals ship outlines, confirming target type, and calculating optimal impact points. This sensor fusion, combining passive RF, infrared, and active radar, creates a targeting solution no single sensor could achieve alone. And because the missile processes everything on board using advanced algorithms, it makes targeting decisions in seconds that would take human operators minutes to analyze. Here's where LRASM crosses into territory that makes people uncomfortable. The missile doesn't just detect targets. It chooses which ones to attack. The onboard processor runs complex algorithms that evaluate multiple factors: threat level, target value, probability of kill, defensive capabilities, and even coordination with other missiles. If multiple LRASMs are in the air simultaneously, a tactic called cooperative engagement, they communicate via data link, sharing targeting information and coordinating attacks to overwhelm defenses. One missile might identify 3 destroyers and a carrier. The algorithm determines that the carrier represents the highest value target but also has the most robust defenses. Instead of all missiles attacking the carrier and potentially being defeated by concentrated defensive fire, the system might assign 2 missiles to engage escorts, while the others attack the carrier from multiple angles, saturating its defenses. This isn't speculation. Lockheed Martin confirmed LRASM has demonstrated this capability in testing. In 2019, 2 LRASMs were launched against multiple maritime targets. The missiles autonomously detected, tracked, and engaged specific vessels while avoiding neutral ships operating in the same area. The test validated not just targeting accuracy, but the missile's ability to discriminate between hostile and non-hostile contacts, a capability essential in crowded shipping lanes where civilian vessels operate near military targets. The autonomous nature creates tactical advantages adversaries cannot easily counter. Traditional missiles follow predictable attack profiles. Defenders know the likely approach vector, altitude, and timing based on launch parameters. They can position defenses accordingly. LRASM's loitering behavior destroys that predictability. The missile might arrive at the target area and circle for 30 minutes, analyzing defenses, waiting for optimal conditions, or coordinating with other weapons. It might approach from an unexpected direction. It might delay attack until electronic warfare creates jamming opportunities. It might change targets mid-flight if a higher priority vessel appears. Defenders face an invisible threat, making unpredictable decisions. And by the time the missile goes active for terminal attack, reaction time measures in seconds. The Navy awarded Lockheed Martin a contract for LRASM development in 2009, with the program entering accelerated acquisition in 2014 due to growing concerns about Chinese naval expansion and anti-access/area denial capabilities. Initial operational capability was achieved in 2019 for the air-launched variant, with B-1B Lancer bombers receiving the weapon first. The Air Force saw immediate value in giving strategic bombers a standoff anti-ship capability that didn't require fighter escort or close-range penetration of defended airspace. The Navy followed with surface-launched variants in 2021, integrating LRASM into the Mk-41 vertical launch system used on Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers. That integration meant existing fleet assets gained LRASM capability with minimal modification, dramatically expanding the number of platforms that could employ the weapon. As of 2024, the Navy plans to procure over 1,500 LRASMs through 2030. Production is ramping from approximately 120 missiles annually to 250 by 2027, and the unit cost, on initially around $4 million per missile, is dropping as production scales increase, potentially reaching $3 million per unit at full rate production. That cost matters. At $3 million per missile, LRASM costs less than a Tomahawk cruise missile, which runs approximately $1.9 million for the most recent Block V variants, but lacks LRASM's autonomous targeting and loitering capabilities. The value proposition is compelling. For marginally higher cost, you get a weapon that can operate in GPS-denied, communications-jammed environments where Tomahawks would struggle. LRASM doesn't just think independently, it flies with extreme low observability. The missile uses a modified AGM-158 BJASSMER airframe, which was designed from the start with radar cross-section reduction in mind. The body features angled surfaces, radar-absorbent materials, and a profile optimized to minimize detection. Flight testing indicates LRASM has a radar cross-section comparable to a large bird, difficult to distinguish from background clutter on radar displays. The missile flies at subsonic speeds, typically around 550 miles per hour. Critics point out that supersonic missiles like the Russian P-800 or Chinese YJ-12 fly faster, but speed creates trade-offs. Supersonic flight generates heat signatures easier to detect with infrared sensors. It reduces range because engines consume fuel faster, and it limits maneuverability during terminal attack. LRASM trades speed for stealth, range, and autonomy. It approaches low and slow, using terrain masking over land or sea-skimming flight profiles over water. It remains passive during most of its flight, making detection extremely difficult until active radar turns on during the final attack phase, and that terminal phase is designed for maximum lethality. The missile carries a 1,000-pound penetrating blast fragmentation warhead. That might sound smaller than some anti-ship weapons, but warhead effectiveness isn't just about raw explosive weight. It's about where and how the warhead detonates. LRASM's targeting algorithms calculate optimal impact points based on ship type. Against a destroyer, it might aim for the superstructure where radar and fire control systems concentrate. Against a carrier, it might target the flight deck or island structure. Against an amphibious assault ship, it might strike amidships where troop compartments and vehicle decks create maximum casualties and damage. The penetrator is designed to punch through ship hulls before detonating internally, maximizing damage. External explosions against naval armor can be mitigated. Internal detonations in confined spaces create overpressure that destroys electronics, ignites fuel and munitions, and compromises structural integrity. A single LRASM hit might not sink a large warship, but it will mission kill it, rendering it combat ineffective, and in coordinated attacks where multiple missiles strike simultaneously, even heavily defended vessels face catastrophic damage. Australia became the first international customer ordering LRASM in 2020, with deliveries beginning in 2024. The Royal Australian Air Force is integrating the weapon onto its F/A 18F Super Hornets and future F-35A Lightning IIs, giving Australia long-range maritime strike capability essential for defending approaches to the continent. Japan has expressed strong interest, though formal procurement decisions remain pending as of late 2025. Given Japan's geographic position and growing concerns about Chinese naval expansion in the East China Sea, LRASM would provide the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force with exactly the standoff capability needed to contest sea control without exposing surface vessels to Chinese DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles. The United Kingdom is evaluating LRASM for integration on Typhoon fighters and potentially future F-35B carriers. The Royal Navy's carrier strike groups need long-range anti-ship weapons that don't require fighter aircraft to penetrate heavily defended airspace. These aren't casual purchases. Australia's initial order alone was valued at over $990 million. That investment level reveals how seriously allied nations take the threat environment and how valuable they consider LRASM's autonomous capabilities. Here's what makes LRASM truly scary for adversaries. It doesn't just add another weapon to the inventory, it fundamentally changes the calculus of naval engagement. China has spent decades building a navy specifically designed to keep American carriers away from Taiwan and the South China Sea. The strategy relies on long-range sensors, over-the-horizon targeting, and weapons that can strike before American forces close to weapon range. As long as American missiles required platforms to approach within 100 miles and expose themselves to targeting, China's strategy worked. LRASM breaks that strategy. American destroyers can launch from 200 plus miles away, immediately turn and evade, while their missiles autonomously hunt targets. 1B bombers can carry 24 LRASMs externally, launching from standoff range and saturating defenses with autonomous weapons that coordinate their own attacks. F/A-18S and F-35S can strike without ever entering defended airspace. The Chinese Navy cannot track launch platforms that fire and retreat before radars detect them. They cannot jam missiles that aren't receiving external guidance. They cannot predict attack vectors from weapons making autonomous decisions. And they cannot efficiently allocate defensive resources when missiles loiter, forcing defenses to remain active for extended periods, burning through expensive interceptors on threats that might or might not attack. This is the strategic shift. Naval combat is no longer about who has the most ships or the longest range missiles. It's about who has weapons smart enough to operate independently in degraded environments. And right now, only the United States fields operational autonomous anti-ship missiles at scale. Lockheed Martin is already developing LRASM Block 2 with enhanced capabilities. Details remain classified, but program documents suggest improvements in range, sensor performance, and networking with other platforms. There's also indication Block 2 will integrate with the Navy's emerging Naval Integrated Fire Control Counter-Air NIFC-CA architecture, allowing LRASM to receive targeting updates from aircraft, satellites, and other ships even while operating autonomously. The long-term vision extends beyond anti-ship roles. Engineers are exploring variants for land attack, using the same autonomous targeting capabilities against mobile ground targets like missile launchers, air defense systems, and command vehicles. A cruise missile that can loiter over a battlefield, identify high-value targets, and strike without external guidance would revolutionize strike warfare the same way LRASM is transforming naval combat. Production is projected to continue through at least 2035, with total program value potentially exceeding $15 billion, including development, procurement, and sustainment. That makes LRASM one of the Navy's most significant weapon investments of the decade. The AGM-158 CLRASM represents something rare in weapons development, a capability that creates genuine uncertainty for adversaries. They cannot predict its behavior. They cannot reliably counter its sensors. They cannot defeat its autonomy through jamming or spoofing. A missile that loiters over battlefields, waiting for the right moment to strike, making its own targeting decisions, coordinating with other weapons, and adjusting tactics based on real-time conditions isn't just an improvement over legacy systems. It's a different category of weapon entirely, and the silence from potential adversaries speaks volumes. There are no Chinese equivalents in operational service. Russia's naval strike missiles remain sophisticated but require external targeting. Only the United States fields autonomous anti-ship weapons at this level of capability. That's not an accident. That's the result of decades of investment in sensors, processors, algorithms, and integration. And that investment is now paying strategic dividends in every ocean where American interests are contested. They fire it. It disappears, and somewhere over the horizon, enemy ships face an invisible hunter making decisions no human could make fast enough, striking from angles no one predicted, at times no one expected. That's not the future of naval warfare. That's happening right now. And adversaries are learning that controlling the sea requires more than ships and missiles. It requires answers to autonomous weapons. And they don't have those answers yet.